the trenches, you know God loving on you. You seen Kendrick new album? He said Jesus loves gangsters too, and I am a product of that. I promise you. You feel me? Like welcome to my live, bro. I want to get straight into it because somebody affirmed me earlier and was telling me about how I was telling my story. It's a video called learning about the diaspora. I have a video about the African diaspora where I interviewed my guy Marley, and I had mentioned how I had beat one of my charges. I got charged as a youth, and you feel me? Like it just defined my purpose and my spiritual journey because of how much God was present in those moments. And so they asked me to expound on that. They asked me to expound on that legend and that lore that got me here today. And I was gonna wait on it. Like I literally got that message today. I was gonna wait on it, but I think just through my meditation and my reflection this morning, and I feel like I was just called to just use this time to do it now. Real rap. Like ain't no better time than now. And that's essentially what I've gathered from having the presence of God in my life is that, now is the time that he wants to work on you. You know what I mean? Now is the time that God want to have a relationship with you. So I hope this video can help y'all, strengthen y'all relationship with God as well because that's what is the most foundating factor of everything that you see. You feel me? And I studied all different types of religions getting up to this point. So however way you shape God is however way you shape God for yourself. So I use God as a term that we are all familiar with. And so I'm gonna just get right into it because the story starts with me as a young, 16, 17-year old, but it even starts even sooner than that, right? Because I only highlight the parts where I actually was charged with the crime, but I hadn't always put context on how those events even developed. Because before I was in that situation, there were the events leading up to it. So I think a very much more pivotal time to highlight is number one, I was born in the UK because my parents was military. A lot of people don't know that about me. Whether you met me in Virginia, a lot of people just think like I was always from Virginia. Or if you met me in Philly, a lot of people actually think that I'm from Philly. But I'm actually from the United Kingdom by the way of the military because my parents was in the military. So I want to thank and give praise to that initially because it gave me a broader perspective right out the gate. And I want to put some lights on. So just walk with me. I'm gonna keep talking. So yeah, inevitably I was able to start my journey in the United Kingdom just due to that. So I didn't know what that was going to produce or what that was going to reflect into my life long term. But soon you will learn how much it mattered. You heard me? So moving forward, after a while, I started to recognize, like, after I came to America, one thing that I immediately recognized was just like my parents were having dysfunctions, right? Like their relationship prior to coming to America was much more stable from what I witnessed. But then I started to notice that like they thing became a little turbulent. And I'm just going through this with y'all based on the emotional memory and what we would call the more significant traumatic moments that help us develop our personal views of life. Like I learned through studying psychology, there are chapters in the child's development, right? You have the 0 to 7, then you got the 7 to 14, then the 7 to 20. The 14 to 21. And so that always aligned with. Now I don't want to lie. I was gonna light one of these, but if YouTube sees the smoke, they're gonna ban the video. So yeah. So at the end of the day, I realized from that 0 to 7, my roots were in family. Like my parents didn't move me here until I was about 4 or 5 years old. I remember going to kindergarten. You know what I mean? And So my initial thought of life were revolved around family and things of that nature. Now, you know, shortly after that, my parents would get divorced, and then I was thrusted into a different lifestyle with my father. I ended up living with my father, which is not traditional for young black people. They typically end up with their mothers in those events, which we will see later on in this story how it plays a vital role once again. And so, moving forward from that time, we moved to a neighborhood called Hickory Point. Shouts out to Newport News, Virginia. You already know what time it is. If y'all know, y'all know. Shouts out to Ashton Green. Shouts out to Aqueduct. Shouts out to Courthouse. You feel me? All that. Shouts out to Colony Pines. I would be surprised if those things are even called that anymore, right? Shouts out to me. All of the people that we once knew, more importantly than the places. Beachmont, yeah, all that. So, that time for me was a part of my secondary development, my personality development, right? That's what they say, like you start developing your personality from 7 to 14. So that was where a lot of my worldviews about myself started to come together. And then, from 14 to 21, that's where that significant event that brought us here today, which was when I started catching my charges. That's where that chapter started becoming very significant, and that's your worldview. So let's recap. 0 to 7 is your personal development, your senses, your awareness, right? Your immediate environment and things of that nature. Then 7 to 14, that's you learning more about yourself, trying different things, learning your personality, what makes you click. Then from 14 to 21, that's when you gain your worldview, things that you can't control, things outside of your environment. And 2 of those stages for me were very traumatic. 1, there was the fracturing of my family, and then 2 was the assault and the racism, along with some other systemic problems that were encountered through, the country that I'm from or that I'm living in, which is America, right? And so that just brings me to the details of the story, right? I just wanted to give some context, because without that context, we don't understand how young men actually end up in these environments or in these actions, right? It's a broken family structure, it'd be trauma, it'd be violence, a lack of resources. So that was the path that led me into that. I was telling a very brief story yesterday to a friend about how much my dad always advocated for me to not be outside because of the things that he knew were there. But kids, we oftentimes want to imagine that we're going to go outside and meet a magical character, and then that magical character is going to take us to a magical train, and then that magical train is going to introduce us to some magical friends, and then those magical friends are going to show us and reveal the truth about ourselves and what fun and love truly is, because we don't always experience that at home. And that's a fantasy that we received from Disney. Most Disney movies, they don't have parents. And if they do have parents, they have a deep conflict with them. And so that allows a figment of their imagination or a creative character come into their lives and then cascade them away from the life that they live. And then through that, they're able to meet enchanted beings that are able to help them reveal truths and loves about themselves, thus eventually creating a dissonance for where they were initially from, forsaking that which they come from. And then an event typically occurs where, their parents or their loved ones are, submerged or subdued into some kind of disarray. There's a conflict, there's a climax. Their dad gets captured, or their sister or their little brother or their girlfriend or somebody gets into a real bad situation, and then they end up having to go save them. And then they end up finding a deeper, greater appreciation. They repatriate with their families, and then they typically live in harmony with the creative, imaginative character, right? So that's what we tend to try to live out as our own mythos, especially when you grow up in them homes that are indoctrinated by Hollywood and cartoons. And, especially I'm from the 90s, so that was a lot of what we thought was giving our children privileges or giving our children a childhood that we may have not had ourselves, allowing us to, eat cereal and watch cartoons in the morning. That was very nostalgic for me. So a lot of my imagery of how the world was going to save me was depicted through cartoons and like TV and things like that. But I never saw my I never looked at how my community was reaching out and reaching towards one another. It wasn't well depicted as well as it was through the cartoon. So for me to get back on to the point of how these things impacted my adult or my formative years, as they would call them, by the time I was 16, or I'll even go a little further, by the time I was 13 or 14, I was completely dismissive and disconnected from any relationship at home because of just the layers of inconsistencies and traumas that I was, coming from at the time. Like, a lot was happening in the neighborhood. A lot of my friends were going through trauma. A lot of our experiences started to conflict. And, I started developing a different view of myself, more importantly. And, more important, like, to be very specific, if I went the school that I went to, the neighborhood I lived in, if you didn't get into a fight, you would be ridiculed, right? If people picked on you, or people attempted to, like, assault you or do anything, like, they just try to joke on you and you don't retaliate or show dominance or some type of defense, like, people will ridicule you for a long time. So eventually you either become part of the environment and look to thrive in it and survive in it. You learn how to fight. You learn how to tell jokes. You learn how to dress. Because if you don't do these things, then you will be ridiculed and outcast for the next 6 years of your life. It was introduced to me at 6th grade. So from 6th to 12th grade, that would have been your reputation. And I was able to witness that for myself, that people who didn't acclimate to what was trendy or what was acceptable or what was popular, they endured a deep, deep insecurity of loneliness and, outcast. And then that even turned into the people who are very mean and abusive and inconsiderate today because they feel like they were taken advantage of as a child. They were not seen, not heard. So a lot of that is where a lot of the materialism and the Balenciaga and the going out constantly and the disregard for human life comes from, is they felt that all throughout their childhood when they weren't popular, from people who were, trying to grow up fast and find some type of popularity or some type of money. So there's a schism here, right? Earlier on, we were traumatizing ourselves trying to fit in, when we didn't have the ability to do it naturally. And then the people who didn't fit in arbitrarily, right? I didn't want to use that word, but that's what it was. It's like the people who didn't fit in, they ended up suffering. And then now they want to cause people suffering. They want to cause people loneliness. They want to cause people to learn the lessons they had to learn, endure the struggles that they had to endure, go through the things that they had to go through. So that's super important part to where we're about to go, because by the time I was 16, I was 13 where I started being introduced to that version of myself. By the time I was 16, I had built a reputation for it by that time. So from 11 to 13, I was introduced to the ridicule, to the abuse, to the trauma in my environment. From 13 to 16, I had integrated into it. I had adopted it so that I could find a mechanism to survive and defend myself, because I didn't want to be ridiculed continuously up until, I left school. And then, I didn't have any intent to leave my environment at that time. So I was assuming, or I was preparing that was going to be my reputation leading me through the rest of my life with these people. And once again, I can confirm that a lot of people from my environment still enlist and qualify themselves based on their characteristics or actions of the past in our high school lives, you feel me, in our child lives. Like, a lot of people still live off of, fights they got into, or breakups that they had, or even children that they may have conceived, you feel me? So all of those moments meant as much as we projected them to mean. We actually manifested that to be real. And that's why I made a sound decision to leave. But that's not what this is about. We're talking about that significant event that changed my life, that got me in alignment with God and helped me come to terms with what I wanted to do with my life. So from the time I was 16, what we would call, I was knee deep in the streets. You feel me? I was wading through the waters of trauma. I was connecting currencies and vibrational frequencies that were not in alignment with God, what the kids today would call demon time. You heard me? I was on that, where I'm willingly serving the devil, as you would somewhat call it, shaitan, low vibrations. You hear me? Like, we were serving that in the efforts of making a name and making some claims and some assets for ourselves in this world that we live in, right? We didn't see how God could help us. We didn't know that God was helping us. We didn't know what that looked like. We didn't know how to reach God. Shoot, I wasn't even brought up in a church, so my relationship with God was just a whisper. It was just literally my conscience at the time that I hadn't ever learned about either. So, 16, my grades started dropping. I started skipping school more, and eventually, I believe I was 17. It was my senior year, and I know it was my senior year because we were about to go to something called homecoming, right? And homecoming is, it's like a dance. It's related to like sporting events at our school. I don't know. Y'all can let me know in the comments if y'all are familiar with homecomings. I used to see them on TV, so I'm presuming that they're like a thing. So I went with my friend, and I think I should give some context to who this individual is. But I'll tell that after I tell the climax of this story, because I don't want to make this conversation any longer than a half hour today. And so we were in a car, and that car got found by a police car, right? So we're in a car, and then a police car pulls up. It finds us in a parking spot in a very secluded area, and we were smoking weed, and then that proceeded to a search, and then it proceeded into a seizure of drugs, paraphernalia in the car, allegedly, and then they took it to the court of law with 2 character witnesses and tried Terrence Harris, this guy right here, as an adult for multiple felonies with intent to distribute and manufacturing as a minor. Terrence Harris got kicked out of school for that very, very shortly after. I walked into school for several weeks because I hadn't gotten caught that day, which I will give more context to as well. But then I was escorted out of school. My entire academic career was ripped up in a moment's end. I was a very good student. I was in college preparation courses. I was trying out for basketball teams. I was very invested in my school life. Stripped away. And then eventually I had to earn my diploma in an alternative school. I had to cut my hair. I initially had locks before. When I was 17, I was growing my locks already. I had to cut them off because I had to go to alternative school. So I had to start that over as well. And I found myself on probation. And as I was trying to live on probation, I was still hanging out with the same people, and then violated my probation, which got me into more trouble. And then that brought me to the point where, I found myself crying out to God for guidance and for protection, because I known that everything that was happening to me was not only out of my control, but was also something someone else did and that they put on me. And so I needed protection because the federal government was attempting to take my life. So let's add context now, because it sounds super big and daunting and scary and climactic and dramatic, but let's make it all make sense though. So let's take it back to the homecoming, right? From the time I was 16, one day I got off the bus and I met an individual. His name was Michael. Now, Michael was what you would be familiar with as an emo. If you're not familiar with an emo, that's someone who wears a lot of black. They sometimes have piercings if they're old enough. They're into a lot of dark imagery and clothing just due to their emotional conduct and context, right? They're personifying emotions externally, right? So, Michael was an emo kid, and the first thing that he relayed to us was that he was Asian. So we don't have very many Asian people in our community at the time when I was living in my neighborhood. So that's what we called him. He said, "Oh, all right, we're going to call you the Asian," right? Simply said. His name was Michael, but we were calling him the Asian, right? And so from that time, Michael, the Asian, he transitioned from emo to streetwear and, hip hop and predominantly black culture from being around us. Something about it, as y'all know, in the common current day, it's very, very alluring and interesting and entertaining to people from the white community or other ethnicities of people of color that are non-black. And so this was the first time I ever encountered this. This was actually in 2009, right? This was in 2009 that this phenomenon started developing. I can actually acknowledge that he was the first person who introduced me to Wiz Khalifa and Currency and Mac Miller and all of those alternative forms of hip hop, because I was listening to drug dealer rap. We were listening to Waka Flocka, French Montana, Young Jeezy, okay? And if not that, we were listening to the radio. Little Mariah Carey, Shake It Off, you know, little Beyonce, little Busta Rhymes. But I never knew about all of these alternative styles of hip hop, especially from people from other ethnicities. If it wasn't Eminem, I didn't know that there were white rappers, simply said. So from that time, he revealed his deep desire to want to be a rapper. He introduced me to one of his friends as well. And I don't want to keep name dropping people because that's not the type of person that I am. I actually didn't mean to name him as well as publicly, but Michael's a pretty broad name, right? No one knows Michael. So, but we're going to continue to just call him the Asian. So he introduced me to some of his friends. See, so there was a reciprocity model that I was already a part of. If I introduce you to my friends, then who are your friends, so that we can all become friends. So that's what I did. I introduced him to my friends. We became very influential on him. And there was some moments that we intended to utilize his home and his resources to integrate what we were already doing, which was being in the streets, right? So we were using him as a cover because we were aware of the fact that he had privilege. We were aware of the fact that he had more. And so he acknowledged that as well, that he had more and that he had shelter and that he wanted to learn about us and then also experience what we were experiencing, relieving and removing the danger. And that's one thing I want to show y'all as black people today, is that oftentimes you need to look at what the exchange is, because oftentimes you're encountering and enduring the dangers that you're alleviating or protecting other groups of ethnicities from, and you're only sheltered or protected by them while they want you sheltered and protected, as long as it's convenient. There's no real need for them to need shelter or protection, because when the system comes and gets both of y'all, they're going to be okay. I can promise you that. They'll be better than you are, and I'm a product of that. So throughout those next 2 years, me and the Asian develop a very close relationship. He starts introducing me to people in his neighborhood and from his community that he came from. Now, Newport News is very segregated. There's the black side where there's, poverty and low income and, fast food, minimal banks, redlining for home ownership, all the things you think about in a black community. And then there's the other side, right? Beautiful homes, lakefronts, property ownership, small businesses, private schools. He came from that side of town. So that's where he took me, introduced me to a lot of his friends, and I was able to see a lifestyle that was similar to the one that I had known when my parents grew me up in the military, and I was in a more integrated, diverse community of people. When you live on base, it's not predominantly black. So it was very, very nostalgic and refreshing to be around families and people who knew each other and wanted to see each other do well, because in my neighborhood, we were always just attacking each other constantly. And it was refreshing to be somewhere where, there's that banter, there's that, that just personal kid development of people teasing each other, and there's the bullying and all of that stuff as well. But there was more of the productivity, collaboration, and community than it outweighed those detrimental efforts of the people who might have not felt so, communal, right? Some white people don't get along, but they knew they had one thing in common. And so from that point on, that's where we lead up to the homecoming event, because I was with the Asian that afternoon and we were smoking and attempting to get to the homecoming in his neighborhood. And we had went in his car, and the paraphernalia belonged to us mutually, because what he was doing, like I said, eluding danger, he gives me the money to go acquire the drugs that he would like. That was our relationship. I would get like a commission or a tip because I didn't know the value of my time nor my money or freedom. So if he wanted something for $40, if he wanted something for $50, maybe I could get it for 35. I'd keep the $15, and for a 17-year-old, $15 went a long way. And so there was that relationship that we had where I would buy those things for him, and then he would be the one who'd secure them, and he'd share them, and basically smoke it all up and do everything that he wanted to do with it. And so that was the same arrangement that we had that day. The only difference was the police pulled up. And I want to stop right there and acknowledge that I had met Mike. I had met the Asian's parents. His dad was racist. That was the first thing he told me when he invited me into his house. He said, my dad's racist, but he's nice though. He's not like outwardly racist. He's more like prejudiced, but he doesn't feel comfortable around black people. And I watched that white man learn how to accept the presence of black people in his home. I'll acknowledge that. But I now understand what racism was from that day forward. Racism is white people's collective agreement to ensure that they have a privilege over other races of people. They're not going to dismantle that. As much as the Asian would talk down about his dad, he'd talk against him, he talked so bad about his family. I mean, he had criticisms all the time that I inherited as mutual understandings or values. But then I learned that night very, very quickly that, the first thing that happened when the police car pulled up behind us, they flashed a light, and I started immediately seeing the Asians' demeanor shift into fear, because typically he's very rambunctious. He's very outspoken, especially once he adopted a lot of the characteristics of my friends and associates. It put a battery in his back, which gave him a lot more confidence than he was actually. He had a lot more confidence than he actually encapsulated. He didn't really have it. He was only that confident when he was around us. He actually had his little brother with him that day as well, interestingly enough. And we were all, intending to go. I actually had a friend of mine with me who wasn't typically around. And so there was 4 people. The police pull up, and then long story short, we get out the car. They proceed to search the vehicle. And in that moment, I ask the Asian, I'm asking him, I'm like, yo, make sure you don't, don't tell. Like, don't say anything. As long as you don't say anything, everything's going to be all good. The cops, they started creating intimidation. They started talking about the charges and time. And, they start threatening us. And eventually, my friend who was with me, he announced, he whispered to me, he said, yo, if they pop that trunk, which where the drugs were at, he said, if they pop that trunk, I'm leaving. And I'm like, yo, if you leave, then we're all guilty, right? We'll all be tried as guilty if you run away. If we're all here, then the only person who will be held accountable is the driver, because it's within their car and it belongs to the driver. So let's just stay and let the law work itself out. We have no reason to run. But due to his lack of awareness about the law and his fear, my friend, he runs off as soon as they pop the trunk. So then I run off, right? Now, this is where it makes this situation interesting, because like I just mentioned, state law prohibits that if you find something in someone's vehicle, especially not within someone else's possession, then it belongs to the licensed driver of the car. So I have no reason to concern myself with this, because I'm thinking at that point, he has a super clean alibi. Super clean alibi. It's those guys' stuff. I don't know who they are. Very simple. Yeah, it's those guys' stuff, but I don't know who they are. So y'all gonna have to look for them and do the police work. But guess what happened? That didn't happen, y'all. And I didn't know that that's what happened either. So let's fast forward to my perspective in this situation so that y'all can see the full perspective of the situation secondhand. So that was where I mentioned I went to school. I thought everything was okay. Because when I saw Michael, the Asian, he told me everything was cool. He said, oh, I told them it wasn't you. The police dropped me off at the house. They gave me a summons, told me to appear in court. That was it. He told me there was nothing else to worry about. He told me that I was fine. Following that, I was at the mall buying a BlackBerry, because that's what days we were in. I was buying a BlackBerry at the store, and my dad calls me furious. Terrence, get home right now. Never heard this type of anger in his voice before. Then I tell the agent we need to leave. So when we're coming through the entrance of the neighborhood to go to his house, right? We pass my house and I see cop cars in front of it. Not common. In that moment, the agent's demeanor shifts very, very quickly. From that moment, something came over me. And he started asking me questions as far as, do you know what that is? Do you know what that is? I'm like, absolutely do not. So I walk home. I get to the house. My dad hides me upstairs. He proceeds to deal with the police. He tells me not only are they charging me with everything that happened that day that they got caught, that we all got caught, he actually explains to me that they have two character witnesses willing to testify on the behalf of those drugs and paraphernalia being mine. And guess who those two witnesses were? The agent and his little brother. So not only did he lie, he cooperated. And I was cooked. I was very upset, very sad, very scared, very unprepared, but I knew I couldn't reveal what was really going on to him because he had already backstabbed me. So the next time I saw him, I told him nothing was wrong, told him nothing happened, everything was all good. The same thing he did to me. Eventually, I got taken out of school, so then I had to reveal what had truly occurred. And then from that point forward, I've already mentioned, right? Because everything changed for me from that point forward. I did not have a school career, didn't have any hair, didn't have my parents' trust, and was labeled a criminal as a child. I wasn't able to work my job anymore. I was working at a Wendy's. Everything shifted for me, all off of something someone else said that belonged to them, that there was no evidence that I actually had done. So I ended up having to hire a lawyer, right? And through that time, my lawyer was explaining that he was going to attempt to get me a first offender's probational charge. And, that was the case. He advocated for that. And that was what I had received. Now, during that time that I was on that probation, I did not learn my lesson, right? Because due to the level of poverty that I was experiencing, and because of how deeply I was really Michael's friend. I was deeply the Asian's friend. I was really his friend. That was really my friend. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he didn't tell on me because that's what he said he didn't do. And I found empathy for him because he told me the deeper root of the story. He said he went home and he said his dad was the one who pressured him into telling that story. And he was feeling grief due to what his father was feeling and that his little brother was involved. So even early on in my journey, I had divine masculinity and empathy, but for the wrong things and for the wrong people, because I needed them for myself. And I think that's a lesson that we can all learn from my story, is all of these beautiful energies and empathies that we can offer the world, we need to offer them to ourselves and people who look like us. It just at least first. I think there was room for me to empathize with his issues, him having to protect his brother, him maintaining an image and a relationship with his father. Like, I don't discriminate against any of that, but not at the cost of my life and my freedom. That was where I drew the line. So eventually, as my life started to fall deeper into criminality, deeper into poverty, deeper into danger, my resentment for him grew. Because initially as a child, I didn't understand how far that had set me back. I knew my feelings were hurt, but I still was in the same environment as him. We lived in the same neighborhood. So I would see him all the time. And initially from, 17 to 18, I got some distance from him, but I would still see him around, and I didn't want to violate probation. So there was only so much that I could, express as my anger with him. From 19 to 20, I was experiencing homelessness. My dad and I had separated at that time, and so I didn't have anywhere to go consistently. So that also led me into inconsistent relationships, whether it be with my friends or allowing myself to still have some entertainment or share some type of space with the Asian, especially considering in the court's eyes, I have no reason to, excuse me, in the court's eyes, it looks suspicious for me to hold a grief or a grievance with him. And I use that as an alibi to, even influence, even maybe like the people around me at the time, because I needed to secure the fact that I could stand on whatever happened to me. And at this point, this is called self-inflicted harm. Because I wanted to still be his friend, because I didn't really have any friends or support at the time. My dad was gone and I was in the streets. And if you know what the streets is like, no one's your friend. And that was the closest thing that I had to a friend in a long time. And I was desperate, right? So eventually, I ended up getting another charge while I was on probation. That caused for me, and that one I was wrongfully accused as well. I actually was at a function, like a party. Police came in the party. They found drugs on the premises and charged us all for them. Very similar circumstance. And then following that, I was wrongfully obstructed for justice at a mall because a police officer accused me of smelling my marijuana. Now, I want to let you all know that I got all these charges dismissed. The first charge got expunged from my record because it happened while I was a minor. I served my community service. I've completed my probation, so it got expunged. It's still on public record, but it's as an expunged charge, I believe. Maybe they might have taken it down by now. And then so the second charge, where I violated probation being at that function where they found drugs but they weren't on me, I was able to get that charge dismissed due to a lack of evidence. I actually went to that court hearing and said, Your Honor, I was just trying to get some girls. And the entire courtroom laughed. But I was being genuine. I was honestly just attempting to get some girls that day. I wasn't in the interest of being around drugs or any of those things. That was just what happened. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the third occurrence, I bought a lawyer. By then I was 21, so I bought my lawyer as well. Then I had two lawyers at that time, and the police officer didn't show up because he knew he wrongfully detained me, and he never actually secured any drugs in that event as well. So in all three of these events, I never had drugs on me, but I was charged for drugs, right? And that just tells you how the American system works, the American justice system. They're not doing their work. They're not doing their due diligence. They're not really investigating. They're just sticking things together that work statistically. If the statistics support it, just throw it together because everybody else will believe it anyway. So there were black people here, there were white people here, but it's like, at the end of the day, you know who they're going to go with. So I want to highlight for the last few minutes my relationship with God through all of this, because that's what this was all about. I just wanted to share the story because people want to know the details, because a lot of people go through this as well and don't see the forces that are working on them. As young black boys, the entire federal government is working on you, right? They're working to make you illiterate by 4th grade so that they can push you through a IEP or what they call those programs where they teach kids with special needs, right? And so that they can get extra funding, and then by the time you turn 18, they're going to send you out in the world so that you can commit a crime, and then you'll be in jail as a free laborer, right? 25 to life. You get some drugs, something will happen, right? And so this is for your plan. It's called planned obsolescence. You're either going to die or you're going to go to jail based on the environment that we already put you in, and we subjected the majority of people who look like you. And yeah, so your life is already a target, young black man, from the beginning of where this starts at. And I didn't understand that, so I fell right into the trap early, just like a lot of my friends did, and a lot of them didn't make it. Some of my friends died. Some of my friends accidentally got people pregnant. Some of my friends went to jail for several years. Some of my friends never passed high school. A lot of us fell into those traps. All of us did not make it out. And I wasn't born in a church home, so I didn't know God as well as maybe other people did. But from the time I was in 4th grade, I excelled academically. That was what sheltered me. That was what my parents equipped me with, is to be intelligent. and articulate. So that held me out until about ninth or 10th grade. Shouts out to all the little girlfriends I had that warmed my heart as well and kept me on a straight path and motivated me to be the best version of myself. I mean, it's always black women that always affirm my purpose and keep me in a guided light, guided me with their light, essentially. And so by the time I was in 10th grade, I was completely heartbroken, lost my mother, wasn't really connecting well with my father. And, my friends were very, very traumatized, so we oftentimes hurt each other. And so I introduced myself to being involved with drugs at that time. And then by then, I had hurt a lot of people close to me, so I was looking for a way to escape. And then that's how the Asian became an outlet for that, because he was taking me to places I had never had access to, because he had a car and he had privileges and he had money and he had things that people in my neighborhood didn't have. They were just there because there was a military section of our neighborhood where people who lived near the military base, they could choose to live in our neighborhood and use their, house subsidy stuff. And so, by the time I caught those charges with him, I had nowhere else to turn. There was no one else there for me. My dad was here and there, but he was battling substance abuse from here, from time to time as well. So I didn't have anybody to turn to. And I remember coming home from one of my probation meetings, and they were telling me that I was going to have to take urinalysis and, just do the things that are normally protocol for that. And as the first couple weeks I had ever heard of Kendrick Lamar, ironically enough. I was 18, and one of my drug dealers had showed me Kendrick Lamar on the Dedication 3 mixtape, I believe it was. It was either Dedication 3 or 4. I believe it was 3. And he rapped over the entire album. And I was like, man, this man is very talented. So after that few months or maybe a year, time had passed, and he had dropped Section 80. And I listened to a song called Cush and Corinthians. Mind you, I've never heard of Corinthians because I've never spent much time in the Bible. But I had known what Cush was. And that song helped me bridge the gap between my struggles and my adverse childhood experiences and how God was aligning me for a purpose and wanted a relationship with me. And that just because I wasn't perfect doesn't mean I wasn't worthy for God's love and to be a part of the kingdom that God set for us, right? Now, I'm not no Christian or nothing, but I do want to acknowledge that, the Bible was the place that I started to try to find God, and then it led me to the Quran, and finally I landed on being a Rasta because of how it repatriates and aligns with my will to be the most truest, organic, God-driven version of myself, you feel me? So, once I landed on being Rasta, that's why I titled this From the Hood to the Homeland, because from that time I knew I needed to leave America, because either leave it or rebuild it. I knew I wanted to be a revolutionary. I wanted to build in my community and all of those things as well. It wasn't just immediately leave. That was actually the first priority, is to rebuild. And then if we can't rebuild, then we leave. And so that set the pace for my entire life up until this point. Was that occurrence was when that man when the Asian betrayed me, it opened my heart to God. And I listened to Cush and Corinthians. They say just ride to it, because you never know when a bullet might hit you, and you die to it. Live your life, live it right, be different, do different things, don't be alike, right? Cush and Corinthians by Kendrick Lamar changed my life. And from that point, I asked God, as I smoked my Black and Mild in the bed, I said, God, if you protect me and get me through this, I will give you my life. You can have it. I will serve you. I will do you what you tell me to do. And ever since I started that relationship with God, my life has changed forever. I locked my hair after I got out of that alternative school, and I never turned back. These are the same locks I started, and I kept going, and I'm still going. So I think that's enough for today. I don't want to tell my whole life story. Please share this with somebody who's going through something, court related, or looking for an outlet, especially any Black men who are going through these adverse experiences. I think this might resonate with them. But thank y'all for y'all time. I went a little bit 15 minutes over, but that's okay. And I hope this, I hope this works well for you too, Queen. I did this for you, and I thank you for that inspiration as well. So bless up.